thank you for all coming to the Vintage Baseball Association conference, and also especially some of you guys that came a long way.
I did.
Yeah, I
I
know.
were your prize this year.
Well, it took me an hour to get here, so I mean, it's basically my backyard here, and something different today. Instead of boring you with a talk about 19th century baseball, I'll bore you to death about the 20th century baseball team, an amateur club with the Stillwater State Prison, which most of you know, but it's only about 40 miles west of here, a little bit north.
I've been there.
Hopefully just as a
hard time in that 1 hour walk through.
Basically, this started as a SABRE project. I've been a SABRE member, Society for American Baseball Research, for over 30 years. I became a SABRE member in about 1982 and started playing vintage baseball in 1986. So I was a little bit familiar with the 19th century when I started playing vintage baseball. So, and I just think SABRE is a great organization to belong to. And there's been a whole number of people, particularly in the 19th century committee, that have helped the Vintage Baseball Association along over the years. So I think there's been some good ties. Hopefully I won't bore you to death and imitate Ben Stein, and Ferris Bueller, If I do, start throwing things at me, so. And yeah, I like donuts. And some of you, if you've go see the exhibit boards that are out in the other room about baseball in Dunn County. That's very well done. That's kind of, I don't know if it's Dustin Dubuque or just the other people here at Dunn County that did that, but that's the type of stuff that SABRE does, and I think that's very well done. Okay, first of my talk, I was starting. The Territorial Legislature in Minnesota made 3 decisions in February of 1851. One of them was to designate St. Paul as the territorial capital city. The other one was to declare St. Anthony as the home of the state university. St. Anthony, for those of you that aren't local, is basically Minneapolis on the east side of the Mississippi River. It was incorporated with the west side of the city in 1872. They were separate cities before 1872, but now it's basically just a neighborhood, not to be confused with a part of St. Paul, which is just east of there, called St. Anthony Park, and so it's a little confusing to newcomers. And the third thing that happened is Stillwater got the Territorial Prison, which became the state prison. At that time, either city could have gotten something else. All 3 of them were just small territorial towns with only a couple of thousand people. It was the frontier. Construction for the prison began in 1851, completed a couple of years later, and then prisoners started moving in 1853. It was carved into the hill just north of downtown Stillwater.
South.
South
of downtown Stillwater.
No, north.
It's north of downtown.
Oh, you're talking
I'm talking about the
prison.
old prison. I'm
The
talking
old-
about
the old prison. Never
Listen,
been there.
listen.
Never been there.
I'll get to the new prison.
There's going to be a test.
This is a photo of the old prison
That's the old
entrance.
one. Okay.
The steps basically are going up to the warden's house, warden's house, which is the only building on the site that still exists anymore. It's also a prison that's shot from the bluff. You can see where the bluff here is, and that's the St. Croix River there, and shot taken during the winter. And you can see there's not a whole lot of room there to play baseball.
They're in prison, they're not there to have fun.
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
See, and there's the courtyard when the prisoners are out on break, yeah.
Not breaking out.
Here's the new prison, which was
All the baseball in the league.
opened in 1914.
Fun time.
And you can see where the field was located there. That's the layout there. Another I don't know what the dimensions were down the line there. I don't think they were major league standards, so balls could probably be hit on the roofs of the buildings or over the fence or over the. And I imagine the balls were in play when they hit the building, so there were a lot of caroms that went back and forth. So here's a shot probably taken from the 1980s. You can see they turned home plate was not in the corner anymore. They moved it to the different corner, so hitting from the other direction.
When did they switch from that old prison to the new prison?
1914.
Okay, first on the old prison, they added the twine factory in 1890, and most of the buildings were torn down in the 1930s, 1936, 37. There was an administration building that was used at the old prison until the 1970s. And finally, I think there was a fire in 2002, which leveled what was left. Now there are condos in there.
Yeah.
And so
That
and
blaze was.
there is, I mentioned the Warden's Museum, and which remains as an exhibit area for the Washington County Historical Society, and they maintain a museum there. So, the old prison was really cramped and crowded, and they were really running out of room. And by they started building a new prison, which is about 3 miles south of basically it's what was called South Stillwater at the time. It's now really called Oak Park Heights, or Bayport. And it's basically like Eric, as you're coming over the bridge, 94 bridge, it's a little bit north of there, right? About 5 miles north of the 94, 95, whatever. Well, anyway, the new prison was ready in 1914, and I was looking for a couple of sources first when I was starting this project, and the first place I looked were the biennial reports of the warden, and in the 1915-1916 biennial report under education and recreation, there was a quote that says, "Baseball has and will always be the popular recreation and penal reformatory institutions. We have a game every Saturday afternoon during the summer hours from 3 to 6 o'clock. From my observation of many years, I consider baseball a very potent factor in the maintenance of discipline." C.S. Reed, Warden.
Nice.
Goes on in 1917, 1918, he says, "All inmates in good standing may watch the baseball game, usually with an outside team as the opponent."
Really? So they bring in a team?
They brought in a team most of the time.
Nice.
I'll go ahead and get into that a little later on. In the 1923 and 1924 report, the warden, who was J. Sullivan at the time, says, "During the baseball season, the score and standings of the major league clubs is posted daily on a large scoreboard in the dining room. The men are appreciative, and there is no question but these weekly diversions have a tendency towards good conduct." And then in a report in June of 1946 mentions, "An officer is detached to supervise the team." That's probably a postscript. They probably had an officer running the team well before 1946. But it
So,
was,
Rich, are you saying that, is there any evidence that they used baseball as the, that's the carrot, so if you don't behave, you can't play?
yes, you had to be in good standing to play or to even watch.
Or in to watch?
Even to watch.
Wait
But,
a minute,
yeah.
you're in prison. You're a criminal. So that's one strike against you. So how much better could you be?
Well,
What do you
this
mean?
is
You
this is
stab
the part of
somebody
the
in the back of the
change
head?
in philosophy in treating the men as human beings and allowing them to have recreation. And baseball was the first sport that was brought into Stillwater State Prison, and it led to other sports, as I'll get into later on. And the prisoners were very appreciative. the average capacity of the prison was about 1,000. And so many of the game reports, they gave the attendance, and the attendance was around 900 or so. And so,
What type of prison was it?
90% of the prison population was able to watch the games on a consistent basis. And
You lost your screen.
all right, well,
Is that Minnesota's largest state prison?
Yes.
Still today?
I think St. Cloud is bigger.
St. Cloud may
St.
be a
Cloud's
little
bigger now?
bit bigger.
You got 1,400 now in Stillwater. St. Cloud might be a little bigger.
I think St. Cloud's
Here's
bigger because
another-
you go there first before you get to, for training, before you go out to the other prisons.
Kind of a grainy photo. Here's another photo that shows where the screen here around the home plate, and then the prisoners are lined up around the baselines just watching the game. So there was another quote that was in Dorothy Seymour Mills and Harold Mills' book, Baseball People's Game, and there was a quote there which I'll read. This is kind of a quote here. If I can maybe read that a little bit. I don't know. I'll read it. So. Oops. Says baseball became incorporated into the unwritten bylaws of the Stillwater, Minnesota State Penitentiary with the appointment of Charles S. Reed as warden in October of 1914. Although inmates had played 1 or 2 games before his arrival, Reed encouraged the baseball spirit supposedly inherent in every man. He put up a huge scoreboard at the front of the dining hall where everyone could see it. Each day before the noon meal, he had the scores of all Major League and Double-A minor league games posted. The men received permission to converse at table every other day, and comments on the deeds of Cobb, Speaker, Johnson, and other stars filled the air. I don't know how he knows that, but in the even more radical move, Reed continued the pay of the Stillwater men working in the prison industries when the shops shut down for the ball games. Although this policy cost the prison an estimated $1,200 per game, or from $5,000 to $6,000 a month, Reed believed the money well forfeited. We try not to forget, he said, that the purpose of the industries is not to make goods and revenue for the state, but to make better men of the inmates, while at the same time protecting society. Inmates at Stillwater fielded both a first and second team, and the prison's weekly newspaper published accounts of the game, played every Saturday afternoon and on holidays, and attended by all inmates except those deprived of the privilege for misconduct. High walls and buildings bound the field, and balls hit over them were lost. Although 4 iron lampposts stood at the outfield, no accidents ever occurred. I don't know.
I'm sure.
An outsider, usually a Stillwater citizen, umpired the games. All costs and uniforms and equipment came from a quarter admission charge visitors. I contacted Dorothy Seymour Mills and wondered about this, where this quote came from, and she said, well, the research materials are now at Cornell, and I contacted Cornell, and they never got back to me, so I don't really know where the source of this quote is. I just think they're overstating the money loss a little bit.
Well, no,
Too
it's
much.
because they shut down the industry and they weren't making
Well,
products.
my point is, they probably played, they really worked a half-hour day on Saturday, maybe up almost to game time. Most industries work 5.5-hour days anyway, so they weren't losing time too much.
800
And they were off on holidays too. And the prison industries had a monopoly pretty much on the twine factory especially. So they weren't at a competitive disadvantage to shut down for ball games once a week, you know. It just seems to me a little specious there. And the other thing is balls hit over the fence. I mean, they could go retrieve them, you know, that was no big deal. I mean, if they really needed to do that. The evidence of a second 9 was not I found that in the early years, there were a couple of teams until the main team started. There was a second 9 that if a team didn't show up at the last minute, they could get a team of the other prisoners to basically a pickup team that would play the regular team. And that happened a good 25, 30 times over the 60 years that I researched. The A team, in other words, won most of those games. I don't know, 20 to 25, and I can show you that a little bit later. But my major source of information on the team was the Prison Mirror, or the prison newspaper. It is the oldest continuously published prison newspaper in the country.
Still today.
It started in 1887, and it was a weekly between 1887 and 1955. From 1956 through August of 1993, it was a bi-weekly, or that means every other week. So getting games in that time period, sometimes they were a good week or so behind, or there were several games in an issue at that point. And then from September of 1993 to date, it's been a monthly. I don't know if you can read this, only the masthead. It is managed and edited by the prisoners. It aims to be a home newspaper to encourage moral and intellectual improvement among the prisoners, to acquaint the public with the true status of the prisoner, to disseminate penological information, and to aid in dispelling that prejudice which has ever been the bar sinister to a fallen man's self-redemption. Anyway, each prisoner was allowed one copy, and he was allowed to send one home or to a friend for free. The paper was delivered to his cell and placed on the foot of, and then had been placed on the foot of his bed the next morning for disposal. So he had basically a day to read it, and it was only a couple page newspaper anyway, so it wasn't a big deal there. It was a good source of baseball news as well. I mean, during the early years, they had notices on the Federal League rosters and such. A number of here's in prison. This kind of shows one of the. They use some illustrations and kind of try to humor who tries to steal home anything. Illustration. This is before the days of photos, so you know.
Better.
High school boys are game little players, but no match.
Here's
for them.
They
a
play
beat out in
prisoners.
fuel counter. And then in the early years, they just called the prison team the Stars or the Grays. But in 1936, they had a contest among the prisoners to come up with a new name.
That's great. Haven't heard that one in a while.
Some of the names that were proposed were the Hermits, the Spinners, Rebels, Interstate Comets, the Fagans, from Oliver Twist, I assume, you know. The Walled City Gophers,
Get under.
Sinners, and Jaybirds. They had some, you know, obviously all birds and insects and beasts and all-stars and hurricanes and cyclones and that type of thing. So all climbers. They had a kind of a weighting system, and they came up with the name for Sissel socks. Sissel was the raw product that they used to make twine. I imagine sisal and hemp were probably interchanged, as technically they're not the same thing, but hemp is locally grown. As far as I know, sisal is only grown in South America. I can't believe that they import it from South America. I'm sure they used to use hemp.
Yep.
And there was a just a mistaken, you know, they confused the two, and the names were interchanged, but Sissel and Hemp are, you know, well, I mentioned not technically the same.
You
Sissel
can't
was-
smoke Sissel, can
Probably not, probably not.
Well, and the hemp they use doesn't have THC in it.
you? Oh, okay.
So you could smoke it and you'll just get a headache or
Okay.
something, or nothing.
Yeah, there's no THC.
Let's see.
The hemp sucks. Sounds nice. I like it. Sign me up.
Ah, yeah. The hemp
Sign me up. The hemp sucks. Where do I get a pair? Come on over.
This is a spreadsheet of their record over the years, and I went through each year, filed their record.
Now, is that newspaper still, you said it's still happening today?
Yeah.
Is there still a distribution just within the prison? Because I've never seen the paper and I don't live too far.
Yeah, I imagine it's like I say, it's available to the prisoners and they can send out a
Family.
copy. And the Minnesota Historical Society by law is allowed to collect newspapers from around the city, including the prison, and
Yeah.
they collected the prison newspapers from day one, so.
Okay.
We get it too.
And, okay,
You
and
do get
Washington
it?
County,
Oh, cool.
so it's still available. Their record over the 70-some years, I went from 1914 through 1972. They had a record of 689 wins, 546 defeats, and 43 ties. And you can see here the record. Most of the years they played 25 to 30 games. Mainly on Saturdays and in the major holidays.
And they're playing normally, and they're playing with gloves.
Yeah.
More modern.
They don't have a losing record yet in the season, like all together for 10 years.
Yeah, I'm trying to say what their worst record ever was.
First season looked like it
They
was
started
3
0
and
14 there, that's.
I think one year I know they lost like 12 in a row,
I think it's
the first 12 games or whatever. I can't remember the year. But then they won 14 of the last 18 games or something that year, so it's kind of a schizophrenic year, so I don't know.
Rich.
How do they get on to the 18? Do they have to try out, or is it something where somebody just picks you?
You just have to get a
They
record.
basically had tryouts. They had enough interest in the team that the manager that they had to make tryouts, and
They
they
had
had
to
to be a
try.
pretty good ball player to make the club. So
So Rich, you might get to this, and if you can wait, if you are gonna get to it, I'm just curious if there's any players once released that, you know, made the big time or played.
I haven't come across that. I kind of kept my eyes open. I haven't gone through every single box score looking at the names, and I'll get to the names a little.
I was thinking the opposite. How many famous ball players
Oh, ended up
went
in
into
prison.
prison? They'd be like, yeah, they want that guy. The Warrens are swapping people, you know.
Many of the prisoners had some baseball experience, obviously, growing up, playing the game as a sandlot kid, or play high school ball or college ball. I came across a number of instances of former college players or high school players, gosh, who were just graduated, were in high school a year or two before, and then they found themselves in prison, and they're playing prison ball. There were a number, their major opponents were the local amateur teams around. And there were a number of games against professional teams. The first one is in October of 1916. They played the Minneapolis Millers.
Oh, yeah.
And the Millers only won 10-7, so. Then also in October of 1924, they played the St. Paul Saints. The Saints won 8-2. In August of 1930, they played a team called the Chicago Giants. I suspect that was a African-American team. That was a close game, 8-7, I believe. The Sissel Sox won that game. In 1940, they played the St. Paul Saints, and here's one of the game accounts. This one's from the Pioneer Press. The game ended 15-5. Here's the article from the prison here itself. Fairly good coverage. And in 1941, they also played the St. Paul Saints, and that ended up only 6-5. So that was a fairly close game as well. There's a conflicting account on this game. The Pioneer Press says it was 6-5, but the Mirror has it, the Saints went in the game 10-5 in 10 innings. So, what the official score. 1942, the Saints played in the prison as well, and they won. The Saints won 9-2. This is from the Pioneer Press as well. Oops.
Hey, how are they?
And then in 1944, in July, the Saints and the Millers played each other, and the Millers won that game 9-4. Mike Kelly was the manager of the Millers, so they were often referred to as the Kells. So.
Can you go back two? Or two? One more. That one? Okay, hold on.
Shane.
Hold on, rain and mud. Play barefoot. There's a good guy.
Yeah, there was one game account where the Saints were, it rained or it was really muddy.
Yeah. That's
And-
Fernandez.
And the average team would have said, oh, hell, let's go home. But the Saints decided to stay around and play in the mud, and everybody had a good time. You know, it was, they were there to entertain the prisoners, and so they enjoyed that.
Thank you.
That's what I thought.
They did play a number of road games over their history. The first one was in 1918 and April of 1918, where they played the Stillwater Interstate League Club. I believe the Stillwater team won that game.
Yeah, I think in reading that article, you can tell that this one was probably the more accurate one because it says it went into extra innings.
No.
So that may have been, but I
They
guess
won
it could
extra
have been
innings,
10-5.
yeah. They played at least 3 games up in St. Cloud with the St. Cloud Reformatory team. The first one was in September of 1938. And the Sissel Sox won that game 11-5. And they also played up there in June and July of 1941. St. Cloud won both of those games 8-6 and 10-4. They also played 2 games back down in Stillwater in June and August. The Sissel Sox won those games 6-5 and 7-2. Their overall record against St. Cloud from 1938 to 1942 was 16-4. So I suspect the games were discontinued because of the travel restrictions during World War II. Just didn't have gas to burn the bus the
Do
players.
they have stats, Rich, that showed, I guess, the statistics for the prison as far as the number of people that, the number of incidents and things like that, how if they decreased because of having baseball, or did they increase in the winter when you couldn't play? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'd have to look into that a lot
I'd be
more
curious
closely.
just to see how behaviorally things went in that prison. Allowing them to go to another prison to play baseball. I mean,
yeah, like I say, to be on the team, you have to be have good behavior, and you could get kicked off the team if you, and that happened, I'm sure. So, it's not that the prison officials had any problems with the road games like that. I mean, they transferred prisoners all the time. just that they wanted home games to provide entertainment for the prisoners that were in the prison themselves, and became part of prison life. And prisoners began to expect a game on a Saturday or a holiday afternoon, and so, you know, they didn't want to, you know. And there were plenty of teams that were willing to come to the prison. I don't know if they got paid or whatever. Probably not, you know, they paid pretty cheap. But,
And there were no lights, were there, for the field?
no, I imagine not, so all the games were day games.
Spotlights.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, nowadays, yeah, they probably do have lights on that
Yeah,
field.
you said earlier that there was light poles out in the outfield, 4 light poles, but there were no incidents?
Metal poles, but
Metal
it didn't
poles.
say light.
And it said something about not having any injuries, and I
Right.
suspect that's not true. Probably people got hurt all the time, you know, running into the fence and the buildings there, so. The other thing, part of this project I did was trying to compile an all-time roster of
Oh, no.
Well, they went home games too, because it was a fundraiser for them.
yeah, I'm not
Quarter
sure exactly,
entries,
yeah,
so-
quarter, yeah, that got their
Jerseys.
and bats and balls and such. Here's something all-time roster. I've only done 1950 to 1972, and I was trying to see if I can find somebody who played 10 years or longer. It was Ernie Adams, 5 years here between 51 and 59.
Did you ever talk to any of these guys?
Not at the prisoners. I talked with two men who played for the Sissel Sox and played against the prisoners.
Okay.
And it was kind of illuminating. They stamped the ball players that came in with an invisible ink on their hand, and they sort of have to go through a screening thing. So on the way out, the screen would check their hand. That was to prevent the prisoners from sneaking in with the visiting team and trying to sneak out.
There you go.
So, and they had to walk through the cell corridor to the field, and I can imagine that would be kind of intimidating to some high school kid probably, maybe even some guy who was 20, 30 years old too, so it was, but many teams were allowed to stay for a meal after the game. And they mentioned that, oh gosh, yeah, there was good food, because they had a farm that was there that they raised vegetables and
They had a award-winning
beef cattle, and
They had
I don't know if
award-winning
they
cattle,
still have
yes.
that farm there anymore, but it was there for many, many years. And the other guy mentioned that the prisoners would bet cigarettes or whatever on balls and strikes and the outcome of plays and the outcome of the game. And they outright, many of the prisoners outright rooted for the visiting team. So, you can wonder why, maybe too. There's some guys that probably didn't like each other.
We're against the warden, you know, embarrass them.
Well, anyway, there's some of the nicknames here.
I saw that, yeah.
Some bull Tony here,
Our brother.
rabbit.
Thumper.
Speedy rap.
So the guards never had a team, like, wow.
You know, the guards had a team in the early years, and they played outside teams. I never came across them actually playing prisoners. Problem with some of these nicknames is like Brown here. Freckles Brown, the same as Brown and 52. You know, basically they're at the same time. Are these 4 or 5 different guys, or is it 2 different guys? And nicknames are pretty fluid.
Got enough Browns in there?
So then if it's this recent, you have pictures, current, like 70s, 60s?
You know, the Minnesota Historical Society, I believe, has the case files, prisoner files, I believe.
Okay.
I don't know what years they cover. I haven't gone back to check names and see. I got some of these, you need a full name here, just.
Well, no, I mean
call
just a
it.
picture of a game in 1980, 70.
Well, There were some photos in the prison newspaper and some in the Pioneer Press. I haven't found a lot of them, so I don't know how many were existing. You know, it wasn't really open to the public, you know, the only people that saw these games were the prisoners and the visiting team themselves, so, you know. And work continues on this kind of project, trying to get a full roster here.
Now, Rich, let me ask you a question. You said that you were looking for someone who played 10 years.
Yeah.
And if you, whether you found them or not, you see players here, like Jimmy Keane played 2 years. Did they play because they didn't make the team, or they got paroled, or what do you think was the main factor why someone may have not made 10 years?
Probably they got either paroled, they died,
Okay.
or they just got old, and they weren't able to, you know, it's a young man's game in many ways, you know, the guys in their 20s and 30s.
Watch out.
You know, there's an interesting thing, when I was in Columbus. In Muffins, at least before my time, I believe they played at least one game at the Ohio State Pen in Columbus.
Going there, we're going to Mansfield Reformatory and, yeah, where Shawshank was. This summer.
Have you been there before?
No, it's I mean, it's now a historic site.
Oh, it's always a
You
historic
can
site.
take tours, but yeah.
So it's not a working prison.
So you just think that,
Penitentiary is right
Got a
behind it.
baseball from.
It's a very ominous looking building.
Right.
You go over the fence.
so what's the longest tenure player you found?
But you know they closed.
Let's see, some of
'Cause I'm
them
thinking
5 years, but you know.
I'm thinking you get into prison at 22, something happens. You certainly can play 10 years.
Oh, yeah, I don't think 10 years is all that
Not in
surprising.
prison, what are you doing?
Yeah,
It's not
right.
like being in society.
Right,
A lot
right.
less to work.
Well, that's why I was
Well,
asking.
you got
what
bad
type of
behavior.
penitentiary was it? Was it a violent crime? Was it a white collar, you know?
Right.
You know, I don't know how many really lifers are there. It's probably less than 10% of the population. I think most
Right,
of
so
the.
it's not like it's not a
Yeah,
maximum
well,
security.
it's not a
or anything
maximum,
like
it's
that.
okay.
It's,
Most of the guys are paroled within 5 or 10 years
Okay.
in many
Well,
cases.
that would be my guess.
I think
Sort of
that's the
out
max.
quick.
Minnesota's never had the death penalty, right?
Yeah, oh no, we did.
Well, we did it.
So, is that possible? You know, so, oh, sorry.
We haven't executed anybody in 180 years.
Yeah, well, he's getting cooked.
1909 wasn't it?
He stole the base.
That's a good question. Do they allow stealing?
Seventh inning stretch.
There you go.
You're done.
Okay, well, yeah.
Good picture. Oh, man. That's great.
I'm surprised they haven't made this into a movie.
I thought we have murders in Stillwater. I mean, we have long lifers in there, don't we?
This is
A major prison.
an article
Yeah,
from.
I'm betting though they aren't considered on good
from,
behavior.
1922.
No.
Well, actually, this is from 1914, and it doesn't give the prisoners' names at all. It just gives their numbers. And it'd been interesting to see a photo of this if they actually had their numbers on the backs of their. So this could be the first team that had numbers.
It
on
might be
their
5
backs.
numbers.
Yeah. Looks like, yeah, looks like 4 numbers. But anyway.
Poor man, I wish I could do something to get you out here, since the lady visitor.
And occasionally they had stats in the paper here. You can see they use nicknames.
Looks like
Go back one, and I thought they said numbers.
bits in their last.
Well, yeah, that's
a
register number.
Yeah.
Those are registered numbers, yeah. They didn't use names.
It was a prisoner number.
They only did this for a couple of games, and then they decided, oh, well, it's okay to use names.
Yeah, I bet they just shortened the
They
name.
just
down.
shortened the names here. That was,
Uh-oh.
well,
Thorn's
they
in
just
there.
shortened the names there.
Yeah, it's a Minnesota thing. Everybody has a 3- and 4-letter nickname. You know, growing up, I don't know if that's true in other parts of the country too, but.
Barney at 6.
Yeah, it might take me a good deal of time to figure out the real names of these guys, so I don't know if it's even worth the time. So, I mentioned there were other sports played in the prison over the years. Football was one of them. Radio broadcasts of a Gopher football game started in 1937, and the article mentioned there were a number of people who had been in prison for quite a while at that time and didn't even know what radio was, and so that was quite an experience, and that was a good thing. The prison team was called the Colts, and that started in the late 50s. You know, there's the Burt Reynolds, Eddie Albert film, The Longest Yard, you know, it's about a prison football team. He played the guards, played the, no, not at Stillwater, they played college teams. Even back then, freshmen weren't eligible for varsity, so they played the freshman college teams and maybe some high school teams. And there were some independent pro teams too that came in.
Or it's just kind of a philosophical question, but it
No.
seems like less likely in modern day that you get a high school team to go into a prison. Is it a
Yeah.
different perception of prisoners back then, or not as much fear, or different? It just seems.
But, yeah, I don't know. They did play, at least in the 50s and 60s, they did play high school teams, and I've got a record of that, so, you know. Somebody mentioned, yeah, prison baseball would make a good film. I think it would too, at some point, you know. There's plenty of other prisons around the country that have big baseball teams too, so it's not necessarily unique. It's just that Stillwater Prison, because of the prison newspaper, has a well-documented source of games, you know, over 1,000 games for 60-something.
Does anyone still do it?
Yeah, what's today?
And basketball came in later, and room hockey, and boxing and wrestling were mentioned in the 1941 and 42
Oh,
report.
they had wrestling years ago. too.
Well, they
It's
bring in
also
bring in all-star wrestlers and have matches in there, and the prisoners ate that up. And so, kitten ball, which I guess is really softball, was mentioned in the 1930 report. And basically, softball took over in the 1960s and 1970s, and that's probably one of the deaths of the Sissel Sox, is that instead of having 15 guys on a baseball team, you could have 8 teams of softball guys, and so everybody could participate pretty much. And it was harder to get amateur teams, there were less amateur teams around anymore, and just getting guys to
became more structured.
scheduling games was a lot more difficult. And plus there was a guy named Roy Swanson who was not an employee of the prison system, who basically volunteered for years to organize games. He came in and umpired too for a while. And in fact, the field was named after him. And when he retired, replacing him was, you just couldn't do it. And so that's maybe part of the reason too. And they mentioned horseshoes, horseshoes in prison, they can do some damage, but they were mentioned in several.
They gave them the little
reports.
rubber ones.
Maybe, yeah. And volleyball as well.
Or pull up the post.
Now, you mentioned all these events that they're having. That one article you showed said they lost $1,200 by stopping everything. Now they're introducing basketball and wrestling. And are they still making twine in the prison?
Brent may know exactly when the twine factory closed down, but there's prison industries today, right?
Yes, it's called mid-court now.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, when you mentioned only baseball, they lose $1,200. What do they lose when they have basketball and wrestling and
All
boxing?
different
and-
Probably nothing. I mean, they were pretty much, like I mentioned, they were probably, you know, teams among the prisoners, and they would play at night or whatever.
Okay.
They were intramural type.
They got nowhere else to go.
Yeah. So. And then the 1933 and 1934 report mentions films. They mentioned films a little earlier. They'd have films at least once a week, but it kind of caught my eye. I have a little chuckle. It says, the films were censored. No crime or gangster pictures are permitted. Kind of wonder why.
So they don't show films anymore unless it's Disney, so.
Yeah. And so I guess there were some prisoners who probably didn't know Edward G. Robinson was, or all that, so it's kind of But, you know, baseball kind of led the way, leading up to other sports and a more civilized life in prison, I guess. You know, the old prisons, guys were in their cells, you know, 20 some hours a day. They were allowed out to work and eat, but, you know, that was it. But you may even make it a little bit. So there's still work to be done. I still could spend some time compiling game stories, basically from 1925 through 1960. I've done the games on the end of this time span. Because of incomplete game accounts for some years, you know, I'll probably never get complete stats, and I don't know if that's particularly all that important, really. I think working on an all-time roster would be something I may want to finish at some point and get complete games as well as I can, and try to find if there were a prisoner or two that not necessarily major leagues, but a minor league player of some might have played. That would, I think, would be interested. And then finding more photos and particularly the game action and such. And also games played by the prison guards, particularly prior to 1914. And then some, maybe even interviews with players or prisoners or whatever.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of that in that paper then, those papers, I bet.
Well, you know, I worked on this project for actually a number of years, and put it aside for a while and worked on it again. I've written a couple of articles, and one was over there in
You can grab a
Washington
copy.
County newsletter,
What year did they start playing baseball there, Rich?
1914.
Rich, did you ever talk to Bud Grant?
No.
He was in prison?
He was the one Hall of Famer that played in prison, I guess. This is
Oh, he wasn't in prison.
We all know who Bud Grant is, I guess I don't have to go into his. But anyway, he was a 3 sports star at the University of Minnesota, in football and basketball and baseball.
Wasn't he with the Minneapolis Lakers?
He played 2 years for the Lakers, so he played NBA basketball. And then he played for the Philadelphia Eagles, so he played some football. And I think he played some football up in Canada before he started winning.
Yeah, he was a big star in the
But then he did play several years of basically semi-pro ball in this area. He played for Osceola, Wisconsin for 2 years?
1 or 2 years.
At least 1 year anyway. And then 2 years for the Stillwater Loggers. And 1 year when they played, it was a September game, I think, it was with the Eagles at training camp. And so he missed that game. But the next year he played, the game was in July or something, and he did play in that game. I think he hit a home run, I recall. He was a good hitting outfielder. I think he pitched some too.
He played against the prison team in Stillwater.
Yeah, in Stillwater.
Interesting. What year was that?
52 or 53.
Okay.
And I can look that up. I think he also played up in Brainerd or something.
Did they win?
I believe so.
Who, the Bud Grant's team?
Yeah, well, the Stillwater Loggers were a
Very good
team
at
at that
that.
time.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
any other questions, or I'm sure I missed something.
I just, I wanna know, like with Paul's question, is there any pro who ended up going into prison, or anybody that was in prison that came out and ended up being,
There had to be, with all the people that ran through, there had to be.
Exactly.
One,
that's what I'm
has to
thinking.
be.
Yeah, that'd be
The best example I know is Ron LaFleur, who played for the Tigers in the 70s, was in prison, and Billy Martin heard about him, and he rapidly rose through the ranks. I don't know if he spent much time in the minor leagues at all after being released from prison.
Well, we got Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden. I mean,
Yeah.
Darryl Strawberry
They
came
went
back
the
and played
other
for the
way.
Saints.
Because of drug problems.
They went the other way though, they started as a prison.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they did both. Yeah, they did.
All the people that went through there, there had to be people that played minor league ball.
That's what I'm
Either side, it had to be, there had to be.
There had to be. It's just
They didn't blame.
me recognizing the name as a ball player too. And I may not even.
It had
But-
to happen.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree.
It's
I think it's
just
Just
whether it's
just
a
where the
notable
research
or-
is and how you.
Yeah. Sometimes you find you come across people who reference them almost by accident when you're looking for something else, and it's,
So Rich, do you know if there was any you know, like what, was it 10 years ago, there was a big controversy about TVs were too big in the sex offender treatment program thing or whatever. I mean, was there any kind of legislative thing saying these guys are having too much fun, we should ban baseball in the prisons, or did that ever get to be a political issue that these guys are having too much fun?
I don't know, I'd have to look through the legislative
Not that you're aware
records
of.
to see. I suspect not, maybe among some people they might have to. You know, this was kind of under the radar, you know, you'd have to be really looking through the paper. You know, there were some references to games in the Pioneer Press when they played the Saints and the Millers and such. Those were just scattered games over the course of 60 years that, you know, unless you were an amateur ball player for some team like the American Linen team that played them for 20 years, they came in and played sometimes several times a year. Unless you know, if you were in a ball player, you knew about the prison team, but you know, the average person in the public never saw a game, so.
Are they still playing?
No,
'Cause I've never
the
heard-
team, I didn't find any evidence of a baseball team after 1972. I mentioned they probably, you know, they're playing softball right now.
So, yeah, the way that it would set up, I would imagine softball would take over because they can set up 8, 10 teams and have.
More people can play.
Yeah.
Right, and then now you're setting up inside your institute league where they,
Now it's
instead of
over.
trying to draw people in, and, cause I imagine now politically, we're gonna send a minor league team in to play prison, yeah, I can't think of any organization that would say, yeah, let's go ahead and send our minor league team in.
Yeah, the liability issues
Right,
just
yeah. Yeah.
cloud everything nowadays, and it's funny, some of the game accounts, you know, when balls are hit over the fence, and your prisoners are, yeah, I'll go get it,
I'll throw it back over to you later.
You just wait here, I'll be back in a minute.
And the guys were pretty.
Did any of the gamblers go to prison, like Shoeless Joe or any of those guys? And
No.
Yeah, the
You know,
Black Sox
okay.
turned into
Well,
Cecil Sox.
Danny McLean did.
Yeah.
yeah.
oh, that's true.
Anyway, he's probably the only one, right? I can think of right now. Rose never served prison.
Didn't Rose, didn't
He
he?
went to
No,
halfway
no.
house.
Oh, halfway house.
Not
Yeah.
true prison.
Oh, he had a big fine or something, didn't he, from the
Wow.
IRS or something?
Well, yeah.
Well, I don't know if our time is up, or I guess.
Yeah.
That was good, man, thank you.
Copies of my article are, Brent, are over there, and then I have a more expanded article in the Sabre Research Journal of last fall. It's also available online too, if you're interested.